This is the CrowdCrux Crowdfunding Podcast with Sal Brigman, where we cover everything you need to know to launch a successful crowdfunding campaign. We speak with proven entrepreneurs who've raised money from the crowd and want to teach you how to do the same. Stay tuned because we're about to reveal how to launch your dream project. With your host, Sal Brigman.
Before we get started with this podcast episode, I want to take a second to introduce you to my friends at Fulfillment. If you need help shipping out your Kickstarter or Indiegogo perks or rewards, Fulfillment is the absolute best company for you. I've been working with them for a while and I can vouch for their services. They make it dead simple and take all of the headache out of shipping out all of those boxes, all of those orders to your backers and your customers. If you want to check them out, go to fulfillrite.com at FULFILLRITE.com. What up, crowdfunders? Salvador Brigman here, and I have a really exciting podcast interview for you today. So with today's podcast interview, I interviewed a team, an entrepreneur who successfully raised money on Kickstarter, but not only are they a Kickstarter success story, they are also a crowdfunding demystified success story. Yes, they are a podcast listener, a follower of this podcast that you're listening to right now. Taking back a few months, they were literally in your shoes. They're looking to launch a campaign on Kickstarter. They stumbled on the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. They got a lot out of it. They learned from the guests. They learned from me. They took all of that, all of the different weapons in their toolbox, and they employed that. They had a very successful first few days, hit 30% of their goal, and they ended up raising and exceeding their fundraising goal on Kickstarter for a little bit over $30,000. So this is the example, I think, this is the example that everyone should aspire to, that number one, learning a lot, taking in as much information as you can, but number two, applying that information, and number three, you don't have to be a special quote unquote person or like a marketing guru to be able to do this. Anyone out there, no matter how old you are, no matter your gender, no matter where you're from or the stuff you've done in the past, you can see success on Kickstarter. You just need to follow a proven strategy that works. And it also helps if you have a mentor, and it also helps if you have a bit of a marketing budget. But we're gonna learn from this interview not only about the product and what they did that worked on Kickstarter, but also the things that they wish they did differently. The things that, going back in time, they would have done differently could they launch the project again. And I think that's a really important takeaway from this interview. But in total, this is sort of, to me, like a karmic success story. This is like people who are learning from the podcast are then coming back on the show and are sharing what they learned from the actual launch. These are success stories that are emerging from the CrowdCrux community. It's so cool to me. And I think it's just a really strong testimonial that if you do take the time to educate yourself, if you do take the time to learn about successful crowdfunding strategies, if you do take the time to also, learn from the experience of people who have been there and done that, it's going to pay off. And that sort of leads me into, if you do want all of my basic crowdfunding strategies, and it actually goes beyond the basics of crowdfunding. It also goes into some of the ways that I've learned to drive backers to a project, to get traffic, to get noticed, to get into the media. If you want all of that kind of stuff, you should go to this link, crowdcrux.com/PR. This is the number one resource that I have out there to get you up to speed fast on what's working right now with crowdfunding and Kickstarter in terms of getting funding, getting traffic, and having a successful campaign. When you go to that link, you're going to be prompted to enter your email address. And when you do, I will start sending you training videos to sort of get you up to speed here very quickly. And that way you can spend more time doing what you love rather than just, trying to figure out how to raise money, trying to paste together all these different, revelations from podcast episodes and blog posts, etc. Instead, it's all in one place and it's very easy to consume. So that link is crowdcrux.com/PR at crowdcrux.com/PR. Without further ado, let's get into today's podcast episode. Pam, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to have you on here today. I think you have a product which has successfully raised money on Kickstarter, but it's also something that really needs to exist in the world today. So I'm looking forward to talking a bit about your story, also about, what goes into this book and who it's for, all of that kind of stuff. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Totally. And our email chain, I was looking, goes back a little bit. So it looks like you reached out to me sort of in June talking about this product. And right at that time, it was 3 days in and you had already hit about 30% of your goal. Yeah,
that's about right. Probably closer to 27%. I was watching it really closely. Yes.
And what was your initial goal for the project?
So the goal for the project was twofold. First, we had this mission, which I can talk about in a minute. But in terms of the funding goal, we wanted to produce a really high quality book, and we knew that we would need some capital to do that. So we just came up with the minimum amount that we would need to create the book that we would want to produce. So that's how we came up with the goal of $30,000.
Okay, and for those that are listening and haven't had a chance to check it out, could you sort of tease the book here, who it's for, what the book is about?
Absolutely. So the name of the book is called STEAM Team 5, The Beginning, and it's actually the first of a book series of 5 books that we're producing. My business partner, Greg Helmstetter, and I came up with the concept of the book based on, so this book is an adventure story featuring 5 girls. Each one of them reflects a letter in STEAM. So there's Sandy, a scientist, Trika, technologist, Evelyn, engineer, Ariana, artist, and Maddie, mathematician. And they go on the book is, the first part of the book is their background stories, individual background stories. And the second part of the book is an adventure that they go on where they use their STEAM skills to solve problems.
Ooh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's fun. It was really fun to write.
What actually then made you decide to create a book on this topic? Like, there are a lot of different children's books out there, and that's a very unique kind of a story. It's almost like a superhero story. What made you decide to do that?
Well, so it all originated because Greg has a little girl. She's 7 years old, and he loves to read to her and play with her. And she always wanted him to play dolls and so forth. And he wanted to kind of infuse some education in their playing. And so he created these characters. So he named her dolls, after these characters, and kind of built personas for them. And he would tell her stories, and they would do things with the doll, like, they would solve science problems. The dolls built her dollhouse.
Wow.
And he would explain the engineering rules as he was building the dollhouse with his daughter. So, he told me the story of how he had created these characters, and I thought, wow, I would really wish there was a book out there that had these characters in it. We should make one. Mm-hmm. So that's how they came to life in the book.
Well, what I love about that too is you have a lot of playtime kind of stuff, like with Barbies, etc. But this is more empowering from a using your brain standpoint to build something, or understanding science and technology. That's why I really like the premise behind it.
Yeah, and it was really fun to write because I would fact check everything that we were writing, so making sure that it was scientifically accurate. Mm-hmm. And I actually learned a lot myself, what the nomenclature was and how to explain to kids what a lever is, for example. But, I remember I'm 50, and I remember when I was younger, I loved the Nancy Drew books.
Yeah.
I really loved adventure books, um, and Greg and I spent a lot of time in the bookstore. He was showing me what he was talking about, how, you walk through the store, and it's almost like they bifurcate the genders on the bookshelf. And I don't ever remember them doing that when I was young 40 years ago. So, in many ways, they pinkified a lot of the classic characters. So Nancy Drew, nothing against the Nancy Drew authors, but she has more, slumber parties, and they do each other's nails and stuff like that, versus the Nancy Drew that I read when I was 10 years old. So, we wanted to kind of bring back that classic adventure mystery book and have it feature girls.
It's also something that's such a crucial time in your life. Like, a lot of the decisions I've even made as an adult, I can sort of trace back to the inspiring figures that I had when I was younger. And even reading books and watching films, etc., it all adds into the potential that you have for your life and sort of how you view yourself and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really critical time period. But I am curious here. I mean, your background is in Silicon Valley startups. How then did you meet Greg? Like, how did that come into the picture?
So Greg and I, we both lived in Arizona at the same time, and he had a multimedia company back in the late 80s, early 90s, and so he had that organization with his brother, and I was working for a software company. I started my career writing software manuals, and so definitely on the tech side. I fell in love with the internet primarily because I was able to update my software manuals on the fly, and I thought that was the closest thing to magic I'd ever seen.
That is magic, yeah.
Exactly. And we were moving everything online. It was the early 90s, and I was working in an organization where I got the opportunity to co-build the front end of one of the first online banking applications. So I kind of caught a bug and decided I wanted to move out to Silicon Valley, where I felt that it was the place to be to participate in the excitement going around. And Greg had just graduated from Wharton, and really wanted to move out to Silicon Valley as well. So we both actually moved out to Silicon Valley at the same time.
And that's sort of then, I guess, where it sort of kicked off the conversations, and then that sort of came up sort of organically?
The conversations around
starting the project, launching the Kickstarter, the book, all that.
So this actually, our first move together, we follow each other around, was to Silicon Valley in the late 90s. We moved back to Arizona for about 3 years, and then I moved to Seattle to do some consulting out there, and then back to Arizona. And it was a couple years ago when we first came up with the idea. We're business consulting partners. So we came up with the idea a couple years ago to create this series for girls, and we really just, we're always primarily for me, I guess what was happening was there felt like there was a how do I say it? I was concerned about the progress of women in tech. And then I was extra concerned about the progress of women in general around the late fall last year.
It's been insane too, just to watch some of the tech companies that are out there, some of the largest tech companies, and women just honestly are not represented very well. And even in early stage investing, women just have the short end of the stick when it comes to funding. So there's a lot of disadvantage there in engineering, in tech, particularly for women who are sort of trailblazing in that area.
Yeah, and that was certainly the case when I lived out there. If you were a woman, you had to have extra credentials, honestly, to be taken seriously. So it was always an uphill battle to prove yourself. Sadly, I think that still exists today. And I think it's just simply because not enough people see women in those positions. And I actually have a 10-year-old son, and it became really important to me that he sees women in professional roles and in tech roles. And that was part of the reason I was so excited about this project is I wanted him to read books that show girls solving problems using STEAM skills. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where it starts, honestly, is you can't just get girls excited about becoming leaders. You have to lay the groundwork so that young boys also see them in that role automatically, so that when they're older, it's just not an unexpected thing.
That's a really important point. And not to diverge too much, but on episode 109, I actually had on a female entrepreneur who raised like about $600,000 for Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. And this is a book. Yeah,
I listened to that one.
Oh, did you like that one?
Yeah, that was part of our research, actually. That was fantastic. They did an amazing job.
Well,
that was a great interview.
Thanks. The other day, I was in Barnes & Noble, and I saw this book in Barnes & Noble. And it's just like, wow. That's where it starts, where raising money, creating the product, and then eventually it begins to change the overall bookstore or the environment where you're learning and you're looking up to role models and such.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you just out of curiosity, did you like any other particular podcast episodes or any other places you learned about crowdfunding before you launched?
Well, so we listened to many of your podcasts, and I lurked around quite a bit in online forums and in groups on Facebook. We spent about, I would say, 8 months doing research to try to learn best practices. Part of that research was around actually producing the book, and Greg and I spent one afternoon about 6 hours in a bookstore, actually counting pages, words on pages, just cataloging, trying to find the correct formula for the book and the format for the book. And we spent a lot of time researching books online as well. But in terms of crowdfunding, your podcast, many different articles and Facebook groups, Kickstarter success groups on Facebook. That one was really useful. They encourage people to ask questions and then the experts answer them. Mm-hmm. So that was super helpful just to read through it.
Awesome. The thing I love too about the podcast episodes is that it's very cyclical. Like, you were once a listener of the podcast, and now you're sharing advice and tips, or going to be very shortly, with the audience.
I love that idea, and I can actually tell which advice we followed and what worked for us and what didn't, and I think I know why certain things did and did not work. So already. Let's get into that a little bit. Okay. So now you are a crowdfunding success story. You're a success story, a listener of the podcast. I'm sure there's a lot of information you got leading up to the launch. What did you exactly do to prepare for this launch specifically, and then sort of what happened when you launched? So first we listened to podcasts to get a good idea of how to plan, okay, which was super important. We're marketing people by trade, but this was our first Kickstarter, so we needed to develop a timeline and essentially a big checklist of everything that we needed to do in the pre-marketing stage, in the launch stage, and then the post-launch stage. And we wanted to have all of that defined before we did anything related to the Kickstarter.
So what activities then did that actually encompass? Was this, you were working to build up social media? Were you working to build up an email list? What were you doing exactly?
So the first thing we did in early March is I did some message testing. around the book to try to get an idea what people responded to. And I also did some testing around the target audience, and I used Facebook ads for that, very small budgets, to try to get a feel for what people responded to and what caused them to take action. And so that was the first thing on our list that we did. And then the second was, once we had a good idea who we needed to target, we launched a single page site and started doing pre-marketing campaigns on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, just because even though no one ever mentions LinkedIn, as a marketing person, I need to test everything.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly true.
I was surprised at how well LinkedIn did, actually.
I had to interrupt this podcast episode because I want to introduce you to my friends at The Gadget Flow. Their product discovery platform reaches 22 million people per month. They've helped more than 5,000 crowdfunding campaigns thus far, and they have a social media following of more than 700,000 followers. If you want to gain access to their marketplace and list your own product, you can go to thegadgetflow.com/submit and list your project today.
So for us, so each of those venues had a very different, they ended up playing important and unique roles. And not all of them were related to, driving pledges, but they all contributed in different ways.
So talking about the messaging, and you were testing that, when you say take action, were you then sending these people to like an email sign up, or how are you defining like that, taking action?
So I measure based on clicks. Okay, so the click-through rate, and so these are very tiny tests to measure the click-through rate, just a A/B test messaging, and we sent them to a temporary web page, and that only lasted a couple of days, and then we launched our regular web page, and I was able to launch larger campaigns based on that initial testing.
And with this web page, is this something you guys designed yourself? Did you use a tool to build it? How did you set that up?
It's just it's steamteam5thenumber.com. And if you look at it, it's pretty straightforward. It's a single-page WordPress site. We used one of our vendors that we use for clients to build it. Greg designed it, but it's a pretty straightforward, very simple design.
Very cool. I urge people to check that out, steamteam5.com. I love the vibrancy of the colors and how it sort of showcases the product. When you were doing the email sign up, what was sort of the call to action there? Was it like join for early bird pricing? Was it find out about when we launch? What were you saying there?
It was get notified when we launch. And what was really interesting, and I think probably the best piece of advice I can give to anyone who has a mission-based campaign, was we got really good click-through rates and conversions when we asked people to support our mission to get girls excited about careers in STEM and STEAM. That worked very well. However, it was interesting, that worked really well in pre-marketing to get email signups. When we try to use that same messaging post-launch, or during the launch, when we actually launched, I feel like individuals who had given us their email address and had liked posts on Facebook and shared posts on Facebook kind of felt that they had already contributed to the mission simply by providing an email address and by liking or commenting on our post.
What makes you say that?
I could tell by I had some dialogue with a few of them, and I was watching how they were communicating with other people, and I actually saw them use phrases like, I feel so strongly about this, I'm really supporting the Steam Team 5 book. But when I checked, they were not actually pledging on Kickstarter.
Interesting.
So tons of support, tons of let's make this happen, people. This is such a great idea. But it didn't it did enough, but it didn't always translate to a pledge. So if I were to do it again, I would be very careful about using the phrase support during pre-marketing, and make sure that they know that the support is actually going to happen during the Kickstarter campaign.
That's a very interesting way to think about it, because you can say like just liking something is support, or just giving you the email is like showing support. It's important to really use that key term, I guess, when someone is actually like, this is the action to support it, is to pledge. So that's interesting. Yeah. How many leads then did you actually gather pre-launch?
We had about 3,000 email addresses, and I know that we're not allowed to count it, but we had about over 4,000 Facebook fans, and they weren't necessarily the same people. It was very interesting.
Wow.
And that kind of underscores that I think that there was a mission style support for the product. And that is that we heard from people all over the world, not just the United States. And we heard indirectly from people who are attending like conferences with people from Ireland who were mentioning our book, but they were not on our list.
That's so random. That's cool though.
I had a friend tell me, hey, I went to a conference and I was telling the guy about the book, and he said, they were watching it closely, and they lived in Ireland. And so, we managed to create a great buzz around the book. But what I found was that the backers fell into two main categories. People who were really excited about the mission, okay? And they tended to pledge higher, okay? And then parents who want the mission for their child, but to them this is a tool in their tool set and educating their child. And the latter was not as familiar with the whole Kickstarter model.
Okay.
So a lot of them were confused.
Did you also find the latter to be more the buyer sort of demographic?
Yeah, they're the buyer demographic. And so that again is where I started in the middle of our campaign to separate the buyer persona, parents, and change the call to action to pre-order the book, and keep the mission messaging separate for the people who were more attracted to the mission.
That's very interesting to me, because it is true. Obviously, if you have kids, you're more likely to buy the book. If you're you're really drawn by the message, you might even need like another reason, like get the book for your sibling, or get the book for, I don't know, maybe your friend's kid, or get your book for, someone else in your family. Might need a different message there to get someone to be like, oh, I could get this for this person or that person.
Yeah.
So that's really smart too, that you were able to sort of segment the demographic in that way.
Yeah, we found that it started working a lot better. I was really nervous about using the phrase pre-order. I didn't know if I was, crossing a line by saying pre-order, but I just felt at one point I had to do it in order to get the typical buyer to understand that they were buying a book.
Mm-hmm. Were you seeing most of the initial surge and like the backers for the project? Was this all from email, or were you also like directly messaging people? Were you also hustling in that way?
No, we were hustling like never before. We were doing one-off emails to 500 friends each, and people that we knew who were in tech, and so we were really hustling. So we learned pretty early on, even though at the end of the day we got about an 8% conversion rate on our email list. We knew pretty quickly we weren't going to be able to depend on that email list. So we started sending notes to colleagues in LinkedIn and sending emails to people and stuff. Speaking of Rebel Girls, which we are huge fans of and watch them and study them closely, the day before we launched, Kickstarter launched Kickstarter Gold. And Rebel Girls launched their second book. Ooh. And we thought, this is going to really hurt us or help us. And I think I'm pretty sure it hurt us because we couldn't. Typically, you would see that if someone bought a book, then Kickstarter would recommend a similar book. But we had people tell us that they would go search on Kickstarter for Steam book, and our book didn't show up, and Rebel Girls would often show up.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I mean, from a purely mission perspective, I was like, okay, as long as people are buying books like this, I'm happy. That's the true mission. But in terms of trying to meet our goal, we got a little scared.
Yeah, I mean, I can bet. And I do have a bunch of other tactical questions and strategy stuff I want to ask you. But before we get into that, I do want to ask you. So this was a roller coaster ride. It seems like it's really hustling towards your goal. But I imagine there's also a rewarding component. So when you finally, you closed off the project, it was officially successful. What did that feel like?
Wow. I mean, I did not breathe a sigh of relief until the funds actually came through. But in the middle of it, we were thinking, are we going to make this? Do we have a plan B? And we both decide plan B is to make plan A work.
Ooh, I like that.
And we're not stopping. And so every point, every milestone we hit, I had a shot of Jameson. So the night of our of the end of our Kickstarter, I had the bottle of Jameson there. I was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready for my shot. We were so excited. It was amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine too, just the idea that is now going to be in the world. It's now going to be produced, and you're going to ship it out to people, and it's going to be physically in the world.
It is. And, we gave it to a few people to read who we wanted to get some, tough criticism back from. Do you guys like this book? Is it good? Read it to your kids. And I even gave it to my 10-year-old son, who's kind of, brutally honest. And they loved it. And so there's this feeling that, okay, people love this book, and I'm really excited to get this book into the hands of girls because I think they'll really like it.
And you have backers from Canada, from Australia, Germany, China, Colombia, UK. They're like all over the world here. Yeah.
And it makes it so exciting. It really does.
For you personally, as a marketer and sort of in your career, how has this made you grow, or has this maybe changed? Are you going to be doing more of these types of books and projects like this?
I would love to, honestly. I mean, so I've been doing marketing consulting for almost 25 years, and in tech at least for 25 years. And I've never felt more productive than when we're writing the book and getting and launching the Kickstarter to produce it. I really enjoyed it, and I really felt like I was making an impact. I mean, I feel like we make an impact for our clients all the time, but this is something very personal.
Exactly. Well, this goal, I mean, you were able to surpass the goal, over $30,000 raised, featured on a lot of different publications, Code Like a Girl, Women on Gaming podcast, all of these different people who are now more aware of you. Do you have any advice on the PR front, or sort of getting the word out that way?
Yeah, that was really interesting because we learned that PR was critically important for the success of a Kickstarter, and that we should have everything lined up ahead of time. But what we found with a book is that we had a lot of journalists tell us that they didn't really write about unpublished books. And so they wanted us to reach out to them again when the book was ready to be reviewed. So we actually didn't, while we spent a lot of time reaching out to PR, we didn't really gain too many referrals from PR-related tactics. But I think for most products, it still is super important.
I think that's sort of like the chicken and the egg too. Like, how can you get someone to write about you when they can't see the full book, etc.? It makes them less likely to want to or take that chance. So I can see that totally.
Yeah.
In terms of then when you were live, you did all this pre-launch, you did Facebook ads, collected an email list. When you were live, did you do any kind of paid marketing or any kind of pushes on Facebook ads?
Yes, we sure did. We did a lot of pre-marketing, and then initially my goal was to spend about $1,000 once we launched, just to kind of create momentum. But we ended up spending a lot more than that just to keep momentum going. And there were side benefits to that as well. We developed a lot of relationships through those campaigns. So we wanted to keep those going for that reason as well. But yeah, I would say that in terms of the breakdown, we spent about 2/3 on pre-marketing and 1/3 after launch.
Would you have done the exact same thing, or would you have spent more when you were live?
I think for our particular product, given our particular circumstances, I'm going to change what I'm going to say. If I changed my messaging and did not mention support early on, I would keep it I would hope to spend more on the pre-marketing and less during the campaign.
I'm speaking to the crowdfunders in the audience who have already launched a Kickstarter campaign or have actually even successfully run a campaign. And the reason is, I think you will understand this pain point most. And that is, when you finally do raise money on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, the hardest part is not collecting the cash. The hardest part is shipping out all of those perks and rewards to your backers. It is a nightmare, my friends. It's a lot of spreadsheets, it's a lot of headache, and it's a lot of stress. That's why I recommend BackerKit. If you have not heard of BackerKit, they help you collect surveys, they help you collect data, and the entire fulfillment process is just so much easier and so many less spreadsheets when you use their software. You can check them out at backerkit.com and use CrowdCrux for a special discount.
I think we probably should have nurtured our email list a little bit more and prepared them for what Kickstarter is and so forth a little bit better.
Okay. I can totally see that also, because it sort of helps someone get excited about, as excited as you are about the product, when you're sort of nurturing and nudging and sharing some of those updates via email. So I do sometimes get that kind of a feedback. But you also have a good following on Facebook. I mean, you have, 4,000 people who have liked the page thus far.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of other ways that you're sharing information about this.
Yeah, we have Greg's wife, Kristen. They homeschool their 7-year-old, so they do these STEM and STEAM related activities all the time, and she shares them. And so she's helped us create quite a nice following just by the content that she shares on our Facebook page.
Very cool. So with your background then, in terms of marketing, in terms of everything that you've been doing all of your years working in Silicon Valley, et cetera, did you learn anything that you would wish you knew before you started? You did all this research, you listened to the podcast, you joined Facebook groups, you got some sort of nuggets to take away. Would you have shared anything else with yourself when you were getting started?
Oh, that's such a great question. I would say that if I could share anything with myself before I got started, it would be to, again, I would come back to our pre-marketing and say, be careful about asking twice. So perhaps in the initial pre-marketing, we should have just warmed people up and shared content and explain more about what the continue to give them more information about the book and the importance of the book, and nurtured them a little bit better, so that when it was time for the ask, they knew exactly what we were asking for.
Well said. Well said. I noticed that you're also using BackerKit. BackerKit being the pledge management software kind of solution for fulfillment. Is that something that you found to be helpful? Is that helping you out as you're doing fulfillment, or would you not recommend it or recommend it?
Oh, I highly recommend it. It's been, first, they're super easy to work with. They helped out a lot. I'm pretty tech savvy, but they were able to make some recommendations to simplify things for us. Because we had many different reward tiers, it really helps to keep everything organized. And then we're excited to see. We haven't sent our surveys out yet because we're waiting for a few people to give us information who are going to be featured in the book. So we want to make it like a more streamlined process. But back to your question, BackerKit has really helped us to be able to organize all of our backers and to enable us to offer them add-ons like additional books and so forth. Because a lot of our backers, the people who pledge, it was the first time that they pledged. And I would say by far, I think the breakdown was like 65%. It was the first time they ever pledged. And so it's important to us that we have a tool that enables us to do a little bit of hand-holding in case they get confused by the process.
As we saw also, a lot of these people really they want the product for their kids, but they just maybe aren't familiar with Kickstarter, which is kind of crazy because like Kickstarter seems like omnipotent, like it seems like everyone knows about it, but it's not true.
Yeah, and a lot of people still don't understand that it's not a donation, that they're actually going to get a book. Yeah, it's very interesting.
One of the questions I had for you here too was, I saw you after the campaign have now moved over the funding to the in-demand program. What sort of guided that choice, and is that something that you would recommend? Or I guess, actually, what guided that choice?
So we moved to Indiegogo in demand. The reason was we got a lot of, we launched in the summertime. That's another challenge that I would probably tell pre-launch Pam to reconsider. But, a lot of parents were gone when we were running our campaign. And so we get a lot of requests from people to, ask if they can still participate. So we thought, well, we need to have a place for them to contribute. So we moved over to Indigo in demand so that we could continue the campaign there.
Wonderful. So people can pledge there. They can search that Steam Team 5 on Indiegogo. And it's also on your website, I believe, right?
Yes, it's on our website as well.
Okay, and that's steamteam5.com?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, this is a lot of great information, a lot of great tips. I think the most important thing that I personally took away was being aware of the segments of your audience. And sometimes you're only going to learn that as you're going. Like you're learning that on the fly, which can be scary in a certain way. There's that uncertainty. But that's definitely one thing I took away.
And it's not always intuitive. We assumed that we needed to target people who, the Kickstarter pledger skews, high-tech male. But it was very interesting. Every time we tried to target men, even fathers of daughters, the conversions were not as good. So, I would say continue to test and think outside the box about who it is that that would benefit the most from the product. Not just who would back it, but who would benefit the most.
The final question that I have for you here, this is sort of actually a question I myself wanted to know the answer to. I was looking here. So you published the book, Affiliate Selling, Building Revenue on the Web. And that's like really in line with the stuff I'm interested in, like affiliate marketing, blogging, all that kind of stuff. Did you find there was like a transferal at all with the skills you learned from that to the Kickstarter?
In terms of producing a book?
in terms of affiliate marketing as a whole?
Affiliate marketing. So, wow, that would be fun to have a whole conversation about. But so that book we wrote in 1999, and it's still in many ways highly relevant, although the examples are not any longer. But one of the things we looked at was how to use affiliate marketing to promote a Kickstarter campaign. And I ended up asking around a lot and found that from some people that they felt that timing was so critical on that. Like, you have to be able to launch it at the exact right time during your campaign in order to use it effectively. But for the most part, and this is what people told me, for the most part, the ROI is better if you just run Facebook ads. Mm-hmm.
I've also heard that kind of feedback, particularly from Indiegogo, because you can do affiliate marketing through that. And I've heard people, it's sort of hit and miss. Some people have had some success with it. Other people have had it, kind of just be a waste of time. So it's kind of hit and miss there.
I would imagine with a tech product, though, it would absolutely be something to consider.
Yeah, definitely.
Like a device or some type of high-tech gadget or something.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and also recommending that episode, the podcast episode. People can go and check that out. In addition, look at your book, etc. The final interview question I have for you here, Pam, is what message do you want to continue to share here with this brand? With learning, with teaching kids about not just becoming a superhero, but also becoming a superhero in a way that you want. You could be like an engineer, or you could be a designer superhero. Like, what is it that you want to continue to share? What message with the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think it comes down to kids use STEM and STEAM skills every day in all that they do, even in play. And so it shouldn't be a topic that intimidates children. So our goal with this book is to give STEM and STEAM context so that kids embrace it, and especially girls embrace it. And so that when they problem solve throughout their entire life, they realize that they're actually have these innate skills that they can rely on.
Well said. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing all of those great tips and a bit of your story. Going to have to watch you as you're producing this book, and be sure to keep me updated with all the new things you have coming out.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. And one of the reasons that this podcast episode in particular stands out in my mind is because this podcast is about more than just sharing strategies, just sharing tips and techniques and resources, etc. Of course, I love to do that. I love to do that with the guests. I love to share strategies that you can use to raise money online, but it's about more than that. It's about confidence. It's about grit. It's about feeling ready to launch and knowing that you're taking a risk. You're taking a risk here launching a project. It could completely fail. You could be embarrassed. You could be embarrassed in front of your friends, your family, maybe the small audience that you've built. It's really scary. And particularly even in the middle of a project, it is scary. You don't know how it's going to go. There's a lot of uncertainty here. So my goal is to make you feel more certain about launching a project, about hitting that launch button. I want you to see people, success stories, who are ordinary people just like you and me. They are not marketing gurus. They are not people who are seasoned veterans at launching campaigns. These are individuals who, quite simply, have been just like you learning from this podcast, been just like you learning from blog posts and YouTube videos and other resources that are out there. They've done this. They've figured out the strategies that work, and they applied this to their campaign, and they saw success. So if they can do it, you can also. It's not about your gender, where you're from. It's not about the ventures you've had up until this point. It's about following a proven path that works. The thing that I've always wanted to do with this podcast is to show you that this is an activity, this is a new industry that is happening every single day. Every single day, people are launching campaigns. Every single day, people are being successfully funded. And the question is, why not you? You just have to take a chance on yourself. You have to invest in yourself. And most importantly, you have to invest in your project. So if you're ready to do that, if you are ready to get serious, I invite you to enroll in this email course. It's at crowdcrux.com/PR. I'm going to send you some free training videos that are going to get you up to speed quickly on the best practices for raising money on Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and also some of the ways that I've discovered to get traffic and backers for your campaign. These are ways that I haven't talked about anywhere else. So if you want to check out that link, it's at crowdcrux.com/PR. That is crowdcrux.com/PR. And I think the thing for me that's been just so cool about Kickstarter and the way that it works is we all have different side projects. We all have different things we've been working on. And more often than not, we kind of push them off to the side because they are side projects. They don't take priority in our life. There's something where a year goes by and we're like, oh yeah, I forgot I started this. It's already been a year. Oh my gosh. Time just flies by. But with Kickstarter, with a crowdfunding campaign, you are forced to get focused. You are forced to say, okay, this is the date we're launching. I have to have everything together by that date. Okay, this is the end of the campaign. I have to ship out rewards in this number of months. Otherwise, I'm going to have a lot of angry backers. It forces you to turn that side project into a priority for your life. And it's just such a cool process and experience. And everyone who has gone through it, to me, has said that they would love to do it again and that they just learned so much in that span of time. Again, thank you for tuning into this episode of the podcast. My name is Sal, and I'll see you next time.